right. Hey, everyone, and welcome to another Learning Tech Talks, where we are continually exploring the landscape of all things learning. Today, I am joined by Matt Burr from Nomadic, and we are going to be demystifying the academy. I think that's going to be one of the areas we're going to go. We're also going to dig into how to stay ahead of the machines as it relates to our thing and the opportunities that creates. Matt, I'm looking forward to this. If our spirited discussion backstage is any indication of what's to come, I think our audience is in for a real treat today.
Mm-hmm. Things might get a little wild, but yeah, totally. Very excited. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So and by the way, I cannot tell because you went ahead and blurred your background. So that always throws me. Where are you right now? You're fine. I don't care. But where are you in the world today?
I am in my office in Kingston, New York. So that's in upstate New York, about an hour and a half north of New York City. That's where I am. Nomadic we're true to our name. We're spread around the world. We have folks in.
Was
London,
that intentional?
Paris.
I'm always curious the backstory on the name.
So Tim Sarche, who's my co-founder, when we started Nomadic, it was about 10 years ago, I was here and he was in China. And we had lived and worked together in China for many years. He was still there. I was here. So we were like deeply remote first.
I bet I was going to say, those had to be great meetings trying to coordinate that for a while.
Yeah, it was like you did morning and evenings, it's 12 hours. So you would like work in the morning together and be like, here's what you're supposed to do today. And then like go check in the evening. It's the next person's, it's his morning, my evening. Like, what did you get done today? And what am I going to do today? And then you check in. Yeah. So there's a certain rhythm to that worked. And then he eventually moved back to the UK and our tech team is in the UK. So from the very beginning, back when it was harder, we were very remote and have stayed that way all along. So, yeah.
So the name is fitting. There you go.
The name is fitting.
All right.
This works.
Well, so let's jump right into it on this one with the academy piece, because I did in some of the posts leading up to it talk about this concept of an academy, which I shared with you backstage. When this first hit, again, I had a bit of a eye roll moment where I went, here we go. Like so many things in our industry, we're going to come up with a new term. And the old is going to be the new, but we aren't really going to do the work to change it. So, was this, and it was just the idea that this is just going to become a rebranding of corporate universities. Yeah. I've been pleased to see that a lot of the folks who are leaning into this, that's not what they're doing. Is that happening? Yes, it's happening, but it's just going to always happen. But there is more to this idea of an academy. And I do want to unpack that a little bit first, because I think that's going to set the stage for where we're going with the conversation. So in your mind, when you tell people, hey, we really, try and help focus, or we're driving this kind of academy mindset, what does that mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree with you, by the way. It's like there's an endless proliferation of terms and platform names and whatever. And so there's always
don't forget the 3-letter acronyms that pop up every,
this one doesn't have one. So that's kind of,
it doesn't, not yet.
And I think the connection to the corporate university is also real. What we hope is, instead of it being a rebranding, it's a reimagining, given a totally, like the heydays of the corporate university was now like 25 years ago when that first started. And I think that some of the kind of dreams and aspirations around that moment are actually possible now, but it didn't work back then. Like the old corporate university ended up either being a beautiful physical campus, and some people built amazing corporate universities, or a collection of courses in your LMS that was not so amazing. So, yeah.
Well,
so
and going back to that, coming from like GE days, I think most people in our industry know Crotonville, which the folks over there, we had our issues back and forth, because again, I think in some ways there was some real beauty and respect that I had for, you built an amazing physical environment with some really powerful things that created powerful learning experiences. And you have to be careful that doesn't come back as a cool, I went on this trip.
Yeah.
And then I went back to work type of a thing. And I think that's sometimes the break of the traditional university, when you got it right, was, okay, it was really cool, but did that translate back to performance? So I think then it was like, well, that's not scalable. I know, we'll call our LMS a university. And then you didn't even get the cool experience part.
Yeah,
It was like, well, now you just get like kind of a crappy experience.
Yeah. No, so it's like, what would it mean to take Crotonville, the best of that, to move it online in a meaningful way, make it always on, keep people engaged? That's kind of the aspiration behind an academy. And so there's a few big things that we think about when we think about academies. One is that they serve a different purpose than an LMS or an LXP. An LMS or an LXP is designed to be horizontal. It's designed to stretch across every learning challenge potentially in the organization. An academy is built to be more vertical. It's for a particular group or an audience, a defined audience in your organization. So we build things like the Anheuser-Busch Marketing Academy, which is for marketers, or a leadership academy, but that's for a specific, you've come in there as a leader.
Right. Targeted purpose.
Yeah. So and that is really important, because at the end of the day, an academy lives or dies based on not the content you're delivering, but the community that you're building around it. And we know that communities build around commonality of interest, commonality of problem, people who are facing the same problem and want to talk about it, commonality of experience, right? So to build a community of practice, or to build an ongoing learning community, you need definition, you need boundaries. So an academy actually is a way of creating healthy boundaries to say, when you come into this place, this is who you expect to find here. These are the kind of learning experiences you can expect to have. And this is why it's worth your investment in time over many years. And what that allows is an academy becomes, it's a brand. It becomes an identity that becomes a part of people's lives in a way that's different from a lot of other learning technologies. We were joking before backstage that very few learners, at least, like fall in love with their LMS, right? It's just highly unusual.
I don't know what organizations you've been working with, but everywhere I go, that's like the tab that is open on everyone's.
And they have LMS love clubs and book clubs to just
discuss. They do. I know. Coffee cups and swag. The swag store is just sold out all the time.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm with the wrong people, but anyway,
just saying, but I don't know.
But this does happen with academies. Like they become, so, and that can be inside or outside organizations. They become an important part of people's lives in a meaningful way. They learn things that change their perspective. They meet people that change their career, and they start to associate that with that brand and with that feeling, and it builds over time. So, and that's why, ultimately why we kind of learn to embrace academy was this sense of it building of an institution that lasts over time, right? As opposed to a lot of stuff early on, we would run a great program or a great course, and it was kind of okay, what happens next? Yeah, we'd have to re-engage and start over every time, versus building equity.
Where the academy in many ways comes to life. It becomes part of the lifeblood of that, which that's where, again, going back to what you said, I've seen when it's done right, they are extremely powerful. And I think one of the things you hit on, which is where sometimes the corporate you misses it, is it's not everything to everyone.
Right.
And I think sometimes that's where it goes south when you're like, well, let's make an academy for all. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, but when you make it for everyone, it's not really for anyone. And so then it becomes something that's not really adding a whole lot of value to anyone as a result, versus saying, well, no, we're going to have this directly. And again, I've heard them called different, that boot camps, sprints, experiences. Again, you can call other words if words offend you. But I think the point is, when you really are targeted on this segment of the population that is trying to get better at accomplishing this, let's bring them together. And like you said, in a community, drive them through a development experience.
Yes.
That's powerful. And then again, it's always evolving, and it's alive in many regards, because it's not a static stack of, here are the 8 videos you need to watch.
Right.
And then,
you're whatever, right? Yeah, no. And when you go, so when you start thinking, as professional topics, right? Like the Josh Burson Academy, which we worked on for many years and built with Josh, what we discovered there is there's literally an endless amount of change and discussion and need for learning around the future of HR. It never ends. You don't take your 4 SHRM courses and now you're just an HR person and that's it. Nobody thinks that or wants that. Everyone knows that. And so an academy becomes, it kind of attracts new problems as well too, like in the field. So it's like, okay, well, now we've learned how to do this basic level of HR education, but we have these new problems, and now it was the talent.
How are we
and now it's,
addressing how are we
yeah, exactly.
addressing the impact of generative AI on our organization, or what are we
Yes.
doing about
Yeah.
environmental sustainability, and how are we
Yeah.
thinking about that as we look towards a zero carbon emission type thing? And you're like, I don't know, I guess we haven't thought of that, and that's not in our old learning path. So what do
Yes.
we do?
Yeah,
And the academy
totally.
helps solve for that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it also creates, I mean, the other interesting thing, and increasingly so, is that an academy that's grounded in social, good, real community and meaningful, scalable social behavior creates extraordinary types of data, an amount of data that integrates its way into other kinds of workflows that you wouldn't expect, right? So like in one of our marketing academies, we measure something called influence. So in addition to completion and understanding and kind of normal learning metrics, we're looking at who are the influencers in your marketing organization. Well, turns out for marketing organizations, that data is much more indicative of who the talent they need to find than quiz data, completion data, or understanding data. So, and that is now integrated into performance management systems or workflows in other kinds of ways. So when you have, at the core of it is like, find people who need to talk to each other, there's meaningful and real learning experiences that you can create over time. If that starts to happen, part of the momentum builds because of the data that's coming off of that you can then feed back in and say, okay, we learned from this group of people, or we saw that there was a struggle here, or influencers were interested in this and not interested in this, and that can help us improve and shape and grow the academy over time.
Well, and what's interesting about what you just described, and I think this is an important part of this that's coming out of that. Last week, I had Kyle Jackson from Tailspin on, and we were talking about there's a big difference between passive learning and active learning.
Yeah.
And what you're describing, and I think this is at the heart of a good academy, is it is active learning that's happening versus passive. And I think that's the shift. If you create a series of things that people passively consume, I think it's an offense to call that an academy, because to me, it's like, well, you're not actively asking anyone to participate, to contribute, to be a part of the experience.
Yeah.
A good academy is actually inviting you into that and making you a part of it. And you are just as much a contributor to what's going on as a consumer of it. And to your point, that creates really valuable, meaningful data on who are really the people in your organization and what is the profile of someone who is going to be that talent that can drive your organization forward.
Yeah, totally. And I agree completely. And active learning, I mean, part of the way learning gets active is by putting it into a social context. So one of the things that feels so passive about like e-learning is I'm on my own. And a good academy, you have like different levels of that. So that's why we use we do believe in cohorts, private cohorts, closed groups. So you can have some social dynamic, but you're also not totally exposed. You're not going viral. You have a kind of safer space where you can interact. But then also there's some bigger public forums where maybe you are going to get wider recognition, or a comment could go viral, but those different. And like,
you at least are tipped off that, hey, this is going to happen. So you have a choice in participating.
Yes, exactly. But in the cohort side, part of the way you use the cohort to create a more active sense is like the same reason why, if you're in a regular classroom as a kid and the teacher calls on you and you raise your hand, or you don't raise your hand and you have to say something, the sense of your peers listening to you makes you want to say something better. And if it doesn't work out, then the next time you want to be more prepared, right? We've always used peer pressure and social context in learning to help make people push through hard stuff. Because always with learning, you have to and that's why I don't really believe like clicking through any learning course on your own. You never get uncomfortable. You never get like, oh man, I'm going to have to stand up and say something about this thing that I just learned a couple of days ago. I'm not feeling comfortable about it. Like I'm going to stumble, right?
It doesn't push you outside your zone of proximal development. I mean, if we want to get nerdy on it, right? It's not pushing you outside of that. It's like, well, I can stay right here and not really challenge myself at all. And I will still achieve the same outcome, which we know just from human behavior in general does not drive the best results.
Yeah, totally. And this is especially true in topics that are fuzzier, right? Like leadership talk, right? So it's like, you could probably imagine like a decent and we've seen this, right? Like where you learn
Well,
to code just
if we're
between you and
talking
a
about,
computer.
learn to code, or I'm even thinking like how to assemble. I mean, people can follow instructions to build IKEA furniture. Maybe not
Yes,
well.
absolutely.
Maybe IKEA is a bad example. But, you can put something together without a cohort of people because really when you think about it, you're like, well, we're just getting together and I just need to go step, 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 step. But in things that are knowledge driven, that are human, that are much more squishy, it's like, well, there's not really a nice e-learning that I can run you through that just says, go do this, then go do this, then go do that. There's much more of a behavior skill gap that has to be addressed.
Yeah. And it's especially and almost everything that we're teaching are things that are like, you're going to get thrown into this situation. It's going to be really uncertain. You're going to think it's this way, but it's actually this way. And then you're going to realize that it's that way. And the only
there's
way
going to be 100 variables that we actually don't know what they're going to be in that moment.
Right.
Are you ready?
It's like, yeah.
What?
So what do you do to train? So the best way you can equip people with mental models, you can help them learn how to see things, but then the best thing you do is also help them practice and converse and talk to other people trying to make sense of similar kinds of situations where I can say, oh, Chris, you saw it that way. I saw it this way. Like that's like always how adults have learned to make their way through uncertain situations. What we're trying to do with the Academy is figure out how to make it more scalable, make the best types of those learning experiences more scalable, more efficient, more able to kind of reach the size and scale of some of these problems, right? Yeah. We have clients who are like, well, I have 30,000 people who all need to know this thing in the next 3 months. Like, okay, wow. And not just know it, change the way they're working,
right? Like do it, so not just have like a nice mental model that they can reference on a PowerPoint, but like, no, we need to be able to put them in the situation and they got to execute and land the plane.
Yeah. And so,
well, what's funny too about you with this, so I cut my teeth in elementary and middle school education and then transitioned into corporate. And it was really interesting for me coming into the corporate space, how often it was like, well, adults are like this. And I remember being like, are you kidding? Like, this is no different than I was dealing with middle schoolers. And I have 7 kids now and I watch the way they interact and stuff. It's like, grownups are not really all that different. We just like to think we are. But it's like, actually, no, we stumble around. We kind of engage with each other. We aren't always comfortable in taking risks and all this stuff. And we need those environments that push us and encourage us and support us through that process. And that's how we grow.
Totally. I mean, I think we learn it, like adult learning is there are differences between an adult brain and a child's brain. Okay. But let's just say that that's like 10% of the difference. Most of the difference between them comes from context. Like adults have no time. They have a lot of pressure. They have a lot of stuff in their brain already that they're already trying to make sense of. They maybe have more fixed preconceived notions that are wrong, that are harder to unlodge, those kinds of things. But those are not really cognitive difference so much as they're like social and contextual,
which is why the whole social context of it is so important in this, because it's like, that's how you help break that stuff out. Because like my kids who have never done a thing before, they don't have 500 other situations that they're going, now how do I, deconstruct this situation and then put it together? Like, I don't know what I'm doing right now. I'm just going to try and wing it. But interesting. So I am curious on this because, there's 2 areas I want to go with it. Okay, so here's the first one, and we'll see where we go, and then I'm going to come back to this one later. I get really frustrated by this, but I'm curious how you handle this, because one of the pushbacks, I've always been pushing the lens on digital first, and people assume that means I hate being around people, which there's some truth in that, but I also really enjoy engaging with people and all this other stuff. And I see real value in that. And so it gets misinterpreted as, oh, you don't think people should ever engage live or be together in person. I'm like, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we need to think about how the technology can optimize all of this stuff. And some of the pushback I've seen to digital transformation and learning is, well, it's never quite good if it's not in person. And you've challenge that status quo. And I've personally seen really powerful stuff in the past where it's like, that is not true. So I'm curious, how do you find that right mix? Because the idea that you couldn't do an academy digitally because there's some spirit sprinkles that won't be included in that recipe. Where have you found that mix?
Yeah, I mean, well, so first of all, I'm the same as you because it's like I love seeing human beings in person. I grew up, I cut my teeth as a classroom facilitator. I know what it feels like to be in a group of people that clicks and feels great, and that's awesome, right? So if you have unlimited budget, unlimited time, and unlimited ability to travel around the world, then why not? But the problem is, in the real world, we don't. That's
That's
not the
just it.
real
That's
choice,
not the
right?
real world we work
Yeah.
in.
Yeah. The real choice is often a small number of people are going to get this really powerful experience. A huge number of people are going to get this really awful
The
experience. And then
lunchbox version of the
someday,
steak dinner.
yeah. And someday if they're lucky, once every 5 years, they may get invited into the good experience. And right. And so the question is like, so that just doesn't. So fundamentally, they're not actually at odds with each other. The choice is like, are you having good digital or bad digital, and what comes first? So to your point,
Yeah.
the other thing what we've found is that like when you get this working well, it has all kinds of other knock-on interesting effects that you could not achieve in person, right? So one, we work with a lot of large global clients who are figuring out ways to connect people and share knowledge and conversation that literally would be impossible, right? These are
Yes.
100,000 person plus companies with operations in over 100 countries. They're never getting together. They're never like none of that's happening in person, but we're figuring out ways to make that happen. So it's kind of like, to me, that's kind of like, well, why would I need a car when I have a horse kind of a thing? Like they're two different. Well, no, that's not even a good example, but
I know
something
exactly
of
what
like,
you're
they're
saying,
kind
though.
of like
I hear these arguments sometimes and I'm like, why? I don't understand. I actually struggled. I'm like, I don't understand why we're having these arguments, because I'm not arguing against one or the other. I'm simply saying, let's work in the real world that we live in. And how do we make what we're trying to accomplish the best it can be and accessible to as many people as possible? And Natalia, just on this one, I love your comment on this. And this is what my experience has been time over time is if you're doing this right, this community starts to, and it goes back to what you were saying, the community starts to build on itself, and they find ways to go, this was really powerful. Hey, you're in the same location as I am. We should get together and do a thing. Hey, you're also over here. I'm traveling to this site. Why don't we grab lunch while it almost starts to build this cohesive glue in between the relationships that is required, that people then start to kind of pick this stuff up on their own, and they're not sitting back waiting and going, boy, I really wish 5 years from now when Christopher comes, then we'll hang out. It's like, well, why are you waiting for that? I've always struggled with the debate between the two.
Yeah, totally. And the other thing is that, I mean, even just for the in-person, right? We still spend way too much time in person delivering content, right? So it's like, I've flown everyone to wherever, Las Vegas. Now I'm sitting them in the room and I'm going to put someone up there and they're going to speak in front of a PowerPoint slide. And then maybe
which is the absolute worst mechanism for delivery. Yeah. I mean, when you really think about the suite of tools in front of us, there are so many better ways to say, if I'm going to give you information, I can give that to you in a personalized, flexible way that you can consume however you want. And then let's maximize when we are together, whether it's in person or live, virtual, and let's use that time for the things that we can't do through a podcast.
Yes, totally. And so that's like, so the best, and I mean, and we have clients who are doing really interesting stuff with that, which is like, they have the academy, everybody's in the academy, people who are performing really well in the academy are getting invited into these events that become a place that's really more about networking, going deeper. They're visiting stores, something that's connected, but it's not a substitute, or it's not like the same curriculum, but now repackaged for live, right? It's a totally different experience. And they actually use the experience to help drive engagement and completion in the broader academy rather than the other way around. Because that's like, I know that if I'm performing well in it, then that's how I get a route into this elevated thing, which also can, we can talk about this also, but that can sometimes feel like a black box to people. Like, how do I get to be one of those people in the emerging leader, whatever thing, right?
Right. How do I even get identified and be on anybody's radar to know that I'm somebody who should actively participate in this stuff?
Yeah.
What's funny is you brought something else up as you were talking about it. And Robert, by the way, thanks for your comment, because this ties well to this, in that sometimes the arguments I see, and this is, again, it just makes my head hurt sometimes when it's like, well, we can't do this because of all these things. And it operates off the assumption that this stuff is already happening. So, oh, well, we can't do it digitally because then we won't be able to do all this stuff that we want to do. And it's like, but is that happening today? Because if it's not, you're arguing against an opportunity to do something that isn't in existence today. And to Robert's point, this is the kind of stuff where you start saying, these people weren't connecting before.
Yeah.
We're creating an opportunity for them to connect in meaningful ways and build cohesive relationships that, no, it's not a replacement for things, but it's creating more opportunity for consistent interaction with purpose, which is at the core of relationships anyway. And then instead of saying, how do we force fit networking into learning, then they let the networking stand on its own type of a thing. It doesn't have to be all in one.
Totally. Well, and the other thing I think is when you do social learning well over time, the networking it's part of it naturally. It happens naturally, but you don't have to force it. You don't have to say like, now's the network. Because like, I feel very uncomfortable if I'm like, now's your networking time. And it's like, we all have our name tags and I'm like, and that's
the really awkward, like, okay, everybody go around and say 5 things to this person. You're like, oh gosh, I don't want to do this.
But if I've seen somebody's comment, they wrote something in a learning experience, and I've seen them write something that's like, wow, that really resonates with me. That's so similar. I'm going to send them a quick message. And that's the other thing I think we should remember is like in the whole rest of our lives, we're doing this kind of connecting with people all the time, right? It's all we do. We message each other. We like things on Facebook. We retweet things. We like things on Instagram. Like we send signals to our network through these social kinds of interactions all the time, right? Like liking someone's Instagram post is a very simple but meaningful way to say, I see you, I connected with you, right? And those things build up over time. We can bring so that behavior is very normal in everyday life, and you can use that kind of behavior to build more learning kind of experiences and networks that are in a more explicitly type of learning type of context.
Well, and if anything, my experience with this has been when you do this, and I'll connect this to something, it actually builds a richer experience. When the pandemic hit and everyone suddenly got thrust into the virtual world, which a lot of people were really uncomfortable with, going back to this false assumption, there was this false assumption that we have really good quality relationships. I work well with my team and da-da-da. And then all of a sudden they weren't together. And then it was, oh, see, it's bad now. And it's like, no, it was actually bad before. You just didn't see it because proximity was a mask for the fact that you had really crappy relationships and working, stuff anyway. You didn't know anything about these people, but now you're faced with that. And I think that's something that what we're talking about here, you're creating those opportunities to see and understand the people that you're interacting with, which naturally builds this desire and this sense of, well, how do we sustain this? Because now I know more about you. Now I know who you are. I know the things that we're connected on. I actually want to foster that more than if, like we said, going back to a traditional thing, we fly in for 2 days, we pat each other on the back, we go, that was so great. And then I go back to my life and I never talk to you again. Yeah. It's probably not sustainable.
Right. And it's also like the world changes too fast for that, right? So it's like, okay, if I'm a member of an academy and it's a community of people that I trust and I know that and it's like, now I'm trying to figure out generative AI. I can't wait, or, ChatGPT, like I can't wait a year for an in-person thing. Like I need that now. And I need my people and I need a process. Like there needs to be a place where I can go and learn about that, talk about that, connect with people about that, help to figure that out. Because that's the other thing that an academy allows you to do is
the speed. That's just it. The speed and agility of it.
Yeah. And it's like, it gets so much, the difference is, and again, it is maybe car versus horse and buggy in a way over time. Like it's a dramatically different, it opens up all kinds of other opportunities to be that fast so that you can, and it changes the way we have to plan things. It changes our workflows. It changes the way we need to think about timelines and how much, like how quickly, and it also changes the way we, as L&D teams, we need to think about skill sets on our teams and organizational models and so on, so that you can
Agreed.
respond in real time or close to real time to these things as they come, because they're just going to keep coming, right? I mean, I think, yeah. And we'll talk about AI, but AI is also like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I want to tie to this on the skills piece, but before I do, going back to this, I think there was this pendulum swing that happened where, again, scalability almost took too much emphasis in the iron triangle, where it was like, wow, digital content is so scalable. We can make it once and push it out to everyone. And it's like, well, I mean, yeah, but you almost over-indexed on the scalability, and we lost the richness of, okay, but that's passive consumption. That's not necessarily in and of itself. It's not driving change. And I think then there's the natural swing back to, well, then let's go back to how it was before, which is like, well, like you said before, it's not scalable. It's only accessible to a small group of people. It's not timely. It's not adaptable. So I think what we're talking about when you get the academy right, it's that sweet spot of, yes, let's make it rich and engaging and social and relevant and adaptable. And let's design it with scalability that makes this accessible and inclusive to people who would formerly have no access to these things.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. And core skills that we have as L&D people, like facilitation, for example. Facilitation is a very important skill still in that in between world, but it's very different, because your job as the facilitator moves from being the one at the center of the conversation, moving things around, to the designer of a conversation that you're not going to be a part of, because it's going to scale without you. But you still have to design the so if you just throw out, and we've tried this, you just throw out a discussion forum after a long video and you're like, hey, what did you think about this? The conversation is going to be zero. It's going to be nothing.
Yeah, it's a ghost town.
You have to design that conversation, and and we find, a great teacher. Actually, we find, people with elementary school teaching experience are really good at this, which is like, what is the kind of pacing that you want people to move through? What are the kinds of things they should share first, think about second, third, and pace that in such a way that it will create a dynamic conversation. The skill you developed in a classroom or in a conference room doing that as a facilitator is very similar. It translates well, but it does require, it's a shift of modality to say, I'm designing I'm designing for a well-facilitated conversation, instead of I'm in there facilitating.
I'm in charge of
myself.
And that's where it's like I planted that with you, because that was exactly where I wanted to go next. Was this is a shift. And while there's a lot of transferable skills we can take from this, the role of L&D is very much changing in the world right now. And this isn't even talking about generative AI. This is even just talking about this kind of stuff where we're going, okay, if we're trying to create these dynamic, personalized, inclusive, adaptive experiences compared to a one-size-fits-all digital module that gets pushed into an LMS and assigned out to the masses, there are definitely some transferable skills in that, but it is a different application of that. So I am curious what some of those biggest ones you see for folks who are making this transition, because I've been through this and it's not always an easy jump for people. There's a lot of personal identity that people have tied to the way we were doing things before. And when you start to try and pull that apart and go, your skills matter, but you need to tweak them. Yeah. It's not always really an easy shift.
No, and it's scary. And it's also like, anytime, I mean, there's a natural thing where there was a certain amount of time it took to make a SCORM-based e-learning program, right? And these things are shorter. Like they just have to be, and we have to move faster. And so like our timelines are getting compressed. Like there's all kinds of reasons why this can feel scary. I mean, so, there's a few big things that I think about, which is like that the ability to like understand the business context in which you're working in a really, really deep way and come back with creative, simple solutions that achieve that in a way that the business wasn't even expecting, right? Like that is core to what we do. That's a skill. That's a skill. And that skill is changing on both sides, right? Because it's like what the business needs are changing. So you have to be adept and really learning that. And our tool set and our design template that we're coming back to them with has to evolve as well. And so we have to come back with like surprisingly interesting and compelling new solutions that are surprisingly efficient and scalable and engaging and interesting. And the first time the business partner or your client sees them is like, wow, whoa, what's this? This is amazing. Like that.
And sometimes that's not always the response, by the way.
Of course. No, I mean,
like sometimes it's like, wait a minute, I don't like this because in my
Yes.
head, I have this vision of how this should go. And there is a lot of this pushback of going, yes, but our goal is to achieve the best outcome.
Mhm.
And that's what we're here to do.
Yeah. Yeah. There's like, I asked you for a SCORM course. What did you just bring?
Right.
Like,
I asked you to
for
put together an e-learning.
Yeah, exactly. What is this, right? And so being fluent and confident and saying like, yep, but this is how we're going to achieve your outcomes and this is why. So that's one thing. I think also we have to be really relentless in understanding what on the content side, because there's still content. That's not that,
Yes.
but in an academy, what happens is oftentimes we're actually doing a lot less content, but it's getting a lot more visibility if it's working, right? So it's not a monolithic one fits all, but you need to have these like certain stories or certain things that you're telling can get very, very big inside an organization. So understanding what is truly most engaging for our learners. And for us, that's like almost always real stories told by real people about real stuff. And honestly, right? And like, so when we're imbuing our content with a sense of reality and honesty and authenticity. Yeah, that people want. And then, but like harder stuff is like scripted video conversations. Like it's really, really hard to get those right. And in a highly visible environment, you're going to be getting it wrong for a lot of people. And it's, so we tend to try and like focus in on like, what are the kinds of content that you can make that is going to be great, is going to shift the needle, can be really efficient. A great story from an authentic leader can be 2.5 minutes long and change someone's life. You can change someone's life in 2.5 minutes with a powerful story. A 60-minute scripted e-learning may or may not have that effect. Like it could, it's a huge gamble, let's just say, right? Because,
and I think the point that you're bringing up with this, that I think hopefully this has come through in the dialogue, is that what we're talking about is not a abandon or sunset traditional things and go throw those in the trash and now it's all this. It's like, no, but it's thinking differently about how those things fit into the experience. Because even what you described right there, I think sometimes historically, and this is how I've looked at it, is we've sometimes historically looked at ourselves as information architects. How do we structure the right information perfectly? Yeah. And that doesn't play nice with this way because, well, it is not always the same. And there's a lot of nuance to things and you can't get it right. And so if you're spending all your time going back to your point of trying to get that 60-minute thing perfect, it's useless before it's even done. Yeah. Versus if you say, what is the point of what we're really trying to communicate? And how do I tell that story in such a way that it facilitates and sparks dialogue or challenges people's thinking or brings to life something? You're still trying to create digital content that does that, but you're thinking about it completely differently. You're approaching it completely differently. And that is a big shift.
Yeah. And it's like, what in the design process do we need to say? And what in the design process should we actually ask the cohort to this is very simple, but in like an early instructional design revelation for us was we were trying to think of in a typical nomadic module, we use a lot of stories. We were stuck trying to find an additional story. We felt like we were like, and so we were like, everybody's Googling like, okay, we need a story about a leader who I can't remember what it was. Like they struggled in this way and then they overcame it and it came through this and it ended up with this. Like there was a sort of archetype of what we knew we needed. Everybody's out looking for it. Nobody can find it. And we were like, oh, what if we just threw that back to the cohort? We said, tell us a story, because we had one story like that. We need another, right? So it's like, read that, watch that video and tell us another story about that, right? So then the first time we ran that, we got 75 amazing stories. And we're like, we had spent 5 days looking for one. By asking them, we got 75. And by the way, they all got to choose from those.
And they contributed. Going back to the active learning part,
Yeah.
You're inviting them into that. And again, that is a shift. Instead of thinking we are the holy grail of knowledge and experience. Instead saying, we're the architects of extraordinary experience that you participate in. And I think that's a big thing. And that changes the dynamic. We were joking backstage about going to a VR conference and sitting and just listening to people and going like, well, that's a terrible experience because you're not participating in the experience. And what you just described is a way of saying, invite those participants in, because like we were saying with adult and children, the difference is adults have experiences. They've got a wealth of them that they're bringing to the table. And rather than thinking, I have to have all the answers, you're coming in and saying, hey, here's what we're trying to accomplish. Here's some guideline, but how have you experienced that? And then keeping it on the rails.
Yes, totally. And that in and of itself is a really, really hard skill, right? It's not
it is a hard skill.
And what is the story that you tell that prompts the group to really be honest and tell good stories, right? What's the example that you're using to do that? What happens after that? Where do you take them on that journey next?
And how do you redirect when Gerald tells a story and you go, that's like not what we're trying to do at all? And how do you do that in a way without insulting Gerald, but using it as a learning opportunity to invite people in? I mean, this is a massive skill that transforms those experiences.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And then there's like a whole other question of like, so part of that is about giving up control, like, right. So it's like that, the problem,
which is part of the hard part of moving to this. You're like, oh my gosh, you're asking me to let go. And it's like, yes, that's actually exactly what we're asking you to do.
Yes. Because the alternative is because you don't have control anyway. So it's like the illusion of control versus letting go of so controlling the things that you can't, whatever, control the things you can't, whatever, let go of the things you don't, and then learn from it. So that's the other thing is like, you're going to get it wrong. You're going to be like, okay, I thought this was a great discussion question and it was terrible. Everyone just came in and wrote yes.
Totally bombed.
Right? Or totally bombed. What was it about that didn't work? Was it the question? Was it what happened right before that? So you're having to kind of like, for us, we're often examine an entire learning design through the lens of the conversations it's prompting. Even if the conversation is at the end of a bunch of different content, we'll say, okay, if that conversation was a dud, where was the problem? Like in what part of it could be the question, it could be the content that came before that, it could be the framing of it, it could be the whole academy. It could be like, oh, they were in a marketing academy, but we were teaching them something that they didn't care about. It didn't fit with the brand, right?
Because that's not in any way, shape, or form any of the priorities that our marketing organization.
Usually, it's not that far. But
if you've gone that far, you made some mistakes further up the chain that you probably should take a look at your process.
It's a sign of a bigger problem, but maybe, right? But all of that is like, okay, so what do we do? What do we try next time? Let's try the beautiful thing about running cohorts at scale is you can try these things immediately. You can say, okay, well, that didn't work.
Let's try a new one.
Let's see the next one. And we don't have to wait for a year to get everybody back to Vegas so I don't want to keep harping on the in-person thing, but that's just another example of like something you lose with an only focus on in-person is iteration is very slow.
It's all or nothing.
Right? Yeah.
I know. And it's all or nothing.
Maybe next year's event will be better. Maybe not. Right. But with this, it's like, okay, we ran cohort A last week. Now we have cohort B starting this week. Like, let's see what we could do better week to week or month to month to continually improve and make sure these things are working.
And the community benefits from that because those learnings in cohort B can translate back to cohort A because you're like, well, let's shift and pivot with this group because we learned this over here that we can then apply and continue enhancing the experience. It does make for a much more organic, adaptive journey.
Yeah. And like part of our job as learning folks is to make sure that that's happening on that there's a constant fresh perspective coming in, that we're making sure that we're on like all of those things. That's really, really, really hard. And it's getting harder. But it's also very, we were talking about this backstage. These are very human skills, right? These are not great machine skills. Like convening human beings in a collaborative conversation environment that actually works and scales over time is something that human beings do best, right? You want humans in that process.
Yeah. Well, we've seen what happens
200
when you
words
let AI
on how to
just
be a good coach. Yeah, not right.
We've seen what happens if you just let AI, like we were giving. I just think of the example of Gerald taking the class down a path. That's not where you want AI leaning in, because AI is going to let that train go off the tracks. I mean, just read the Twitter bot story and you can quickly see like, oh, yeah, it's not going to bring that back like a human can. And I think this is going back to this distinct, where do we really stand out? And there's some extraordinary opportunity for us to shine big time when we make these shifts.
Yeah, totally. And also like it's like I went and talked to our CEO, and I got this story from him that was amazing, right? Like that's because I, as a human, talked to him as a human or her as a human, got this story. We shared this story. Other people related to it as human beings. And they so there's the sort of focusing on those human elements of what we do best, which is what actually drives real learning, I think is the key to like making sure we not just survive, but I mean, this is what we were saying, like certain parts of our workflow could go the way of the dodo bird. They're going to very quickly.
Yes.
But the core strategic function that we have is going to be more important than ever, right? Because AI is going to drive.
I'm just laughing at the dodo bird.
Sorry.
No, but I mean, you're spot on with that. And I think that's one of the realities that people are facing right now is there are elements of your job that are going to go the way of the lamplighter. I mean, it's just, there isn't a purpose for it anymore. AI is going to be better equipped to do it. And that's not scary. If anything, that means you can spend more of your time and energy on these distinctly human pieces that, I mean, honestly, when I talk to people, those are the people that give people life. Like those are the parts where their eyes light up and they go like, oh, I love doing that. Nobody's like, you know what I really love doing? Like you said, writing up those 200 words on, that's not the thing that people are like, boy, I am thrilled to do that piece.
Right.
I am curious though on this, because some of the things that we're talking about right now, and if you've got a secret for it, I would love to hear it, because a lot of what we're talking about is getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's the whole thing with the academy. If you're trying to create an academy that is surgically precise of this is exactly how it's going to go and everything's going to, the dominoes are all going to fall in place and it's a Rube Goldberg machine that is going to trigger every time, it's like, that ain't happening. And I personally love, I love being uncomfortable. Right. Okay, I'm just like, great. Like throw me into the deep end of the pool and whatever. If I drowned, you'll pull me out and resuscitate me type of a thing. But I know that's not the case for a lot of people. So I am curious for organizations, because that is a big step, and not to freak people out, but going, you're going to have to become more comfortable with some ambiguity. How have you helped people navigate that? Because that is a tough, that's tough
really
thing
hard
to become more comfortable with.
Yeah. And it's, there's like I tend to I say that I like uncertainty, but actually I don't either. Nobody does true deep uncertainty, like a sense of being very lost in a city, right? Like there's maybe sort of an adventure in that, but the adventure is that you were pretty sure you're going to get unlost at some point, right?
You're not going to die
in a city and you don't think you're going to get unlost. That's a very uncomfortable feeling. And that's what we can get into these patterns where it's like, no, it's not just momentary uncertainty. It's like deep existential, permanent looking uncertainty crisis that can be really hard. So one of the things is like to flip that and say, okay, yes, that's how I feel. Let me look into that feeling and understand that that's also how my learners feel. So if I refocus my energy on the people who I'm tasked with helping, okay, and saying that's what they feel like, then it takes the focus off of my own panic about my own uncertainty and says, okay, someone else who needs me feels this way. What am I going to do? How can I help them work through that? Looking at my own situation. So like understanding that like, yes, generative AI, certain pieces of it are coming for the L&D world. It's coming for everything, right? It's coming for our entire swaths of our organization, not just us. So if you work for
it just created job security for us for more lifetimes than I'm going to be around.
It probably did, right? So, but still, so it's like sit in that uncertainty, now reflect it back. How do I use that to be a more empathetic and better learning and person or teacher? I don't know if that's the right answer, but I think that we do have that advantage of like any moment of crisis like that for us as teachers or educators or learning professionals. you can always assume that the people you need to serve have something similar.
Yeah. If you're
and you can use-
uncomfortable,
yeah.
the people around you are probably 10x that, because you at least have the awareness of, okay, this is an uncomfortable situation. They're walking in blind. So no, I actually think I think that's a really good piece of advice for that. And some of the things that came out of what you described in that, though, that stuck out to me, and this is really my advice to folks on this, is it's leaning into that and going back to challenging the idea, like you said, but you said this earlier on, a lot of times we think we have control of things. And it's like, we don't have control of things. Did you see Netflix attempt at live streaming the other day? I mean, it made like Twitter, it went viral on it because it's like, yeah, see, Netflix, one of the leading providers in streaming services, tried to do a live stream and the whole thing blew up. Because as much as you'd like to think as you have control over everything, you actually don't. And acknowledging that in many regards is one of the first steps in going, okay, so what do I have control of so that I can start focusing on those things and be okay and hold with an open hand the fact that it's actually not all going to go exactly how I thought anyway.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, sometimes there are things we do have control over, but they're inconsequential, but we end up putting too much energy into them, or they're not inconsequential, but it's like, I'm going to spend 7 weeks looking at the SSO login process and 3 days looking at the content experience, whatever, I'm giving an example, but there, you can find that trap, right? Which is like, we gravitate towards the things where there is certainty. And then that actually compounds the problem of the uncertainty areas, because we're now,
one that immediately comes to mind on what you're saying is, I think back to sometimes this is what we do with content. We pour way too much attention on, let's get the content exactly right. Let's use the perfect leadership model. Let's debate and spend weeks defining, like, what is are we going to use a overlapping diagram? Are we going to use a pyramid? Like all this. And it's like, hang on a second. We're going to get in the room and talk with people who've been in leadership for decades. They are not going to care about that. And they're going to throw you for a loop when they go, well, that's not actually how it worked for me. And now you're going, oops, we didn't spend any time planning for how we facilitate that. And I think that's exactly what you're getting at is we can try and zone in on, well, I can control this. I can control the PowerPoint deck.
Yes,
so
totally
let's put
right.
all our attention on that.
Exactly right. Pyramids versus overlapping Venn diagrams and so on. And the other thing is, like, at the end of the day, whatever experience people have, right? 6 weeks later, they're going to have 1 or 2 things that they maybe remember from it or maybe changed. And it's like, did that, and it's not, and the pyramid or the overlapping Venn diagrams is not going to be what determines that. It's going to be like, did it resonate with them? Was it meaningful to them? Was it a story that they could hold on to?
Did they have an opportunity to contribute?
Yes. Did they practice? Did they say their own perspective? Did they think through it live in front of other people? And right, all of those things are what determine 6 weeks later in the chaotic situation, do they do something differently or not? Right. And so those, you have to hone in on those things and say, and let go of the pyramids.
Right. Is mauve or forest green the right color for the background of this PowerPoint slide? And again, I'm in saying it in jest a little bit, while at the same time recognize there is value in quality of content. So I don't misquote me on this and think I don't care about that, because it does. And I have a lot of appreciation for quality design behind it. That is important. But I think what we're pointing out is sometimes when it comes to this, when you're looking at the bigger picture of this experience is going to be dynamic, there's going to be people with all different kinds of points of view coming together, bringing things, reacting to what this is. You might as well just throw your agenda out the window, because it's going to go in a way you didn't expect.
Yeah, exactly. And so the content is really, I agree, it's really important, but it's like, you're not, I think what you and I are talking about are like big, long slides where I've done all the things that I want to teach are on the page, or they're in the deck. It's 80 pages and we've gotten to all the things, right? But actually none of the, like, you need like actually you have time for 4 of the things or 2 of the things. And it's really like 2 of them should be discussion prompts and 1 of them should be a picture. Like, it's very, very much less than we could possibly imagine versus the 80 pages, right? Like, anyway, so Yeah. Anyway, so I know we're almost.
But
at
I think,
time.
but I think the point with this, and this is where sometimes the identity crisis can come in. And I acknowledge this a lot because I used to be a designer myself, and I led teams of designers. And this can feel very scary because you hear this and you hear, so are you saying that what I do doesn't matter? And it's like, no, that's actually not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is the skills that made you good at that still apply to this new way, but you're going to have to refocus them and change the aperture because it's a different way of approaching the situation. Instead of being concerned about the exact, UX of the slide and how this all plays out, instead, you're going to have to think, what might happen in this environment that I need to account for and plan for? And how do I make sure that the question is designed in such a way that it fosters that discussion in a way that can be wrangled?
Totally. Actually, I've been thinking about this. We have a lot of marketing clients, and one of the big things that's happening in marketing, especially big global brands, right, who historically, especially, have been very good at television commercials, right? The whole marketing organization are built around building great television commercials. And that's like, they spend so much time and money and effort, and then they launch it. And they used to have like a post-launch, post-mortem, right? Let's see what worked and what didn't work. What they're trying to shift to is like way more like that. The way more of the energy of the team is in post-launch. In fact, they use this word in marketing, in-flight optimization, which is like where all the learning and exercise and energy is. Like we have now not one commercial, but we have 1,000 pieces of content on 10,000 channels. We're kind of fine tuning and optimizing. And I feel like as learning people, we have to start to think about that as well. Like not just like I made it, I put it in the LMS and I'm done. It's like actually most of our work is comes after in-flight optimization. It's what's happening next. What do I do now? How do I advance to this next thing? And so on. And so it is a more dynamic and faster moving, but it's also could be more interesting, and it's definitely can be more impactful.
I think it's far more fascinating. It's far more fascinating. And it's funny that you bring this up. So Sam, by the way, you've got a setting in your thing that doesn't let your name show up, but I'm able to see who you are. So Sam Rogers brought up this point, and I think this is exactly what you're hitting on. Certainty only happens in reverse. And a lot of times we ignore that. We're like, okay, how do we make sure we get everything right before? And it's like, well, there's no guaranteeing that. So why don't you do it? And then based on what happens, you can reflect back on that and then go, now, how do we quickly adapt or change or evolve what we're doing to try and make it better the next time? And the beauty of digital academies is that next time isn't 2 years from now when we've finally gotten around to bringing the same group of people together because the last one got rained out and we couldn't end up doing it type of a thing. There's a chance to actually make these iterations and move at the speed of business.
Yeah, totally.
There's like 5 other areas that I want to dig into, but in 2 minutes and 6 seconds, I don't think we're going to be able to cover even close to any of them. So closing thoughts in 60 seconds or less for you on, folks who are hearing this and going, okay, I get it. I think this is something that makes sense. Where do you recommend people start with it? Because I think sometimes that's almost one of the biggest challenges. Wow, what you just described, I don't know where to even.
Different people are in different parts of the organization, but it's always good to start with a really tough, important business problem, right? So we're seeing a lot of happening in marketing right now, marketing education, because it's a really, really big problem it's a multi-billion-dollar problem of like, how do I shift the way my marketers think, right? And I need to do it collaboratively. So looking for the right business problem that's connected to that, where this type of learning can really shine quickly. And often that business problem involves a tough audience. Like marketers are a tough audience for learning content.
Yes, they are.
They're very, very hard. So leaning into that and saying like, okay, but not trying to boil the ocean. And that may not be marketing, it may be sales. Like I think Natalia's on here. She launched a sales academy. Like there are, but finding a real business problem that's defined with a defined audience that is hard, but that we know if we get this right will work, and that there's proof that it's working in other places can also help you kind of sort through. So if it's like, that's where I would say.
No,
so start with the problem.
I love that. And I think for folks who may be, embarking on that journey, one of the things I can say from being around the block and getting my teeth kicked in a few times is being sure you're setting expectations based on what we just described, which is it is uncertain. you can make some solid predictions. You can say, I think this is how we're going to approach it. We've done the best in this. We've collaborated around this. Here's what we think we're going to do. But setting those expectations, it's like, but this is a learning experience in and of itself that isn't going to be thrown in an LMS and then set on repeat forever. This is going to be something we adapt and evolve along the way. And I think that helps because in my experience, business leaders expect that things are not going to go right all the time. Right. And I think sometimes when we frame things as, and it's perfect, there is a little bit of an eye roll moment where they're like, oh, yeah, okay. Versus saying, this is what we think is going to happen, but we're going to learn and adapt as we go.
I like it. But it's also, and it's stepping up to say, give me something big. I want to try it.
Yeah, give me something big. Like
we're in a moment where L&D needs to do that. We need to go say, yeah, give me something hard that makes an impact and let me try. Let me see what we can do. Well,
perfect. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for joining me. I told you that once we got going, I probably could spend the better part of the afternoon on here, but I know we both got to go. So thank you so much. Thanks everybody for watching and listening. Hopefully you've taken something from this and can apply it today and actually take the step and take that big swoop that we just described now. So with that, Matt, thank you so much. Thanks everybody. We'll see you next week.
Bye.